Hi everyone and welcome back. We're reading Brightstorm, a skyship adventure by Vashti Hardy, and we're on chapter 8, which is called Harriet Culpepper. The hallway was grand, with russet star-shaped tiling on the floor. Lamps dangled from the ceiling at different heights, giving a warm glow to the wood-panelled walls filled with drawings of exotic landscapes. The scent of spices hit Arthur like a blow to the chest. It smelt of home. Welby moved slowly, every step considered, as though his joints had rusted. He showed them into a large empty drawing room off the hallway. Blossom petals drifted in from an open door at the far end. "Queenie will tell you when it's time," Welby said. With a nod, he slowly left the room. It was a peculiar room, with enormous hinges in the corners of the ceilings and pipes twisting in and out of one of the walls, as though the parts that were usually hidden had broken free from inside. They listened to the groan of Welby's footsteps heading up the stairs. On a chair opposite, an enormous fluffy cat stared at them, her fur the colour of stormy clouds, especially thick around her chin. She observed them with intelligent amber eyes and flicked her velvety tail. "I'm glad we left Parthena at home," Arthur whispered. The walls of the drawing room were as full as those in the hall. Cabinets and cases overflowing with shells, skulls, jars, feathers, pinned butterflies, rocks and drawings of weird and wonderful creatures. Shortly, the cat's ears pricked up. Then the creaking of stairs sounded, and the front door opened and shut again as someone left. The cat jumped from the chair and stood in front of Arthur and Maudie. "Meow," she said. "I guess this is Queenie," Arthur said. "I think she winked at you," Maudie said, blinking. "Meow," the cat said. "I think her intention is to say, 'What are you waiting for?'" Felicity whispered. "She must be a sapient animal," Maudie said. Arthur nodded. "She certainly seems pretty clever." "So I guess you follow her." Queenie looked to Maudie. "Meow." "I think she means both of us." Arthur squeezed Maudie's hand. Felicity wished them luck as they followed Queenie out of the room. Every stair creaked as they walked. Queenie led them to a door at the top of the stairs and meowed. Arthur paused, then knocked. Maudie had become fixated on a lever embedded in the wall. "Look at this. The chain goes all the way through the wall, possibly a signalling system to the kitchen," she whispered. Arthur wasn't listening. He felt too nervous. Footsteps approached from the other side. His stomach churned. The door creaked open, and Welby surveyed them. "If you could refrain from touching anything," he said. Maudie quickly took her hand away from the lever. A bright yet serious voice came from deep in the room. "Welby, show them in." He stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. Arthur and Maudie tiptoed into the dimly lit room. Fringed lamps dotted the many tables, lighting an explosion of paper, books and small machinery. A young woman sat at a large table at the far end of the great room, head down, scribbling with a feather pen. She dipped the nib in a pot and without looking up said, "Names?" "Maudie." Arthur opened his mouth but nothing came out. Maudie pushed his shoulder. Arthur, he said. The young woman behind the table looked up at him. She couldn't have been much more than 25, with short, ruffled hair that wanted to go in different directions, and eyes that sparkled with life and fire as though fueled by some sort of magic within. It reminded Arthur of Dad's. Her gaze lingered on Arthur's iron arm. "Maudie and Arthur." "Just Arthur." She nodded and scribbled some more. The sound of the pen scratching filled the room. Welby took a seat to the side of her. "And why are you here?" she said. "Well, we—" Arthur started, but his throat jarred. She nodded encouragingly. Maudie continued. "We saw the advertisement in the Luntown Chronicle and—" The young woman stood and walked around the table to lean against it. She wore baggy trousers tucked into knee-high leather boots, a loose shirt and a curious belt with lots of dangling metal instruments. Arthur glanced at Maudie, whose eyes had widened and fixed on the tools. The woman shook Maudie's right hand, then Arthur's left. He caught sight of two small birds in flight tattooed on her wrist. They were explorer marks. Every notable explorer used their family symbol. Dad had the mark of the Brightstorm moth. Arthur had been fascinated with it as a child and had made Maudie draw one on his wrist in ink that washed away within days. "Swallows are the bird of freedom," she said, catching Arthur's eye. "My name is Harriet, just Harriet, or Harry to my most trusted friends, or Harriet Culpepper if you'd really like to know, or Harriet Mildred Audrey Culpepper if you're from the bank and here on official business." She leant in teasingly and winked. "Which you're not, are you?" Welby coughed. "They're very young." Harriet put her hands on her hips. "So was I on my first expedition. It didn't stop me." She cupped her hand to her mouth and stage whispered, "Welby's been with the family forever. He's my second in command. He'll be the first to admit he's no spring chicken, but he's surprisingly nimble and quick thinking in life or death situations." Nimble wasn't the first word Arthur would have thought of. "So tell me about yourselves," Harriet said brightly. "I work in the shipyards," Maudie said. Harriet tilted her head and nodded. "Maudie can fix anything," Arthur said. "I'm an engineer like our mother," Maudie added. "Interesting," Harriet said, leaving it hanging for a moment, something clearly turning over in her brain. "And do you sing?" "Do we what?" they said in unison. They used to sing all the time. Dad would play the banjo and they would sing old explorer songs together. Harriet smiled. "Not to worry, Welby sings well enough for all of us. Very important on an expedition, you know." She paused, the curious look back in her eyes. The silence felt suffocating by the time she said, "So won't your parents miss you?" Maudie cleared her throat. "Mum died when we were born and Dad—" She looked at Arthur. Harriet stared deep into his eyes, a quizzical bend to her brow. Then she nodded as though confirming something to herself. "An expedition really is no place for children," Welby persisted. Harriet waved his comment away. "Expeditions are all a matter of motivation. My dream is to be the first to lay my feet where no human in this world has ever reached before, quite simply to see if I can." Her eyes twinkled. "The sovereigns will of course be a bonus, but it isn't everything. So my question to you is, why do you want to leave the life you have right now?" Silence hung in the air. Arthur cleared his throat. "We've always wanted to explore. We know we're young, but—" Harriet interrupted. "Honesty is the foundation of a good crew. I want you to tell me what is really motivating you." He felt as though she could see right inside, that she somehow knew. Maudie gave him a small nod. Our father was Ernest Brightstorm. To his surprise, Harriet didn't look taken aback. She simply said, "I read the news with interest, of course, a terrible business." "He wouldn't have stolen the fuel," Maudie jumped in. "I was going to say it was a terrible business being attacked like that, by beasts." Harriet left a long gap. The Geographical Society agreed there was no other explanation for the theft of fuel from the Victorious. There was no real proof. What if it was local thieves? She tilted her head. "So, your reason for wanting to come on my expedition?" Arthur swallowed. "Our name has been dragged into shame. All we ask is for a chance to reclaim it by succeeding in reaching South Polaris." Maudie stepped forward. "We're not afraid of getting dirty and pulling our weight. We'd work twice as hard as any other member of your crew." Arthur took over. "We'd do everything we can to help you get to South Polaris first. Arthur might only have one arm, but it's strong as two, and he can problem solve a way through almost anything because he's always had to. You should see him tie a knot, and he's great in the kitchen and—" Harriet let out a small laugh. "Okay, I get it." She considered them for several seconds more. "It was a pleasure to meet you both." She shook their hands and returned to her desk and picked up her pen. "A very good day to you." Welby shuffled forward, ushering them towards the door. "We'll be in touch if you are successful," he said in an unconvincing tone. The door closed. So that was it. They'd failed. They hadn't even been asked for their address. They slowly, dejectedly descended the stairs. Felicity came out of the drawing room. "How did it go?" Arthur shook his head. "I'm sure it wasn't that bad, dearies. I have a tingling in my toes, and sure as anything that means the wind's changing." "She couldn't get rid of us fast enough," Maudie said. "Come now, you must remember, there's always hope." Felicity winked at Arthur. Unfortunately, Hope has developed the habit of abandoning us lately, but thank you for your kindness, Miss Wiggity. I hope you have better luck than we have, Arthur said. And that's the end of chapter 8. Thanks very much for listening. See you next time.